Hi, we're the Mona Lisa Twins, and you're listening to Fab 4 Free for All.
Welcome to another edition of the Fab 4 Free for All. My name is Rob Leonard. I'm your moderator for today. Joining me, of course, are my co-hosts, Mitch Axelrod.
Howdy, folks.
And Tony Triguardo.
Hello.
And joining us today is a longtime friend of ours that goes so far back with us. We were watching Beatles on fourth generation VHS tapes and saying, hey, this is better quality than the last one that was seventh generation.
And it all looked like this with like...
Yeah, it was all shaky. And we've known Rob Koenig for a long, long time. I think it's about 40 years now.
Yes, they all get it. We're very old.
Yes.
Now, lots of different connections, yes.
Now, Rob has written an article for the magazine called Retro Fan for the edition... September, October of 2023. It's called Beatles Exploitation. And Rob is a huge collector and an expert on those records that came out in 1964, maybe a couple in 65, where, you know, your parents would buy the records and they said, oh, this is I Want to Hold Your Hand. But it wasn't by the Beatles. It was by
whomever.
We're going to talk about that.
Could have been a grasshopper.
It could have been a bug, you know. So we're going to talk to Rob about that. His article is fantastic in Retro Fan magazine. We highly recommend it. We've read it, but we're going to talk about those records that no one really ever talks about. Let's be honest. And the history of them, Rob covers a lot of it in the article, and Rob knows his stuff about this stuff. There's a lot of them. So, Rob, where did you start? Let's start off with this question. Where do you get, like, we have some of those records, but you have a lot of them. What made you get so involved with these Beatles Exploitation records?
Well, actually, the very, very first Beatle album that I owned was a Beatle Exploitation album.
You see?
If it were. It was the Chipmunks Sing the Beatles.
Okay. That's sort of a, you know, I can see that. That was actually the Chipmunks, but, you know, it was, you know, it says Beatles on it, and they do all Beatles songs, so.
So wait, so the first record you ever bought was Real Love? Sorry.
Oh, come on.
Real Love, I love it too. Sorry.
That won't get us too many comments, Mitch. Thanks, babe.
Well, you know. No, seriously, though. The Chipmunks, huh? That was on Liberty Records in 64?
Right.
When did you get it?
Liberty Sunset.
I assume one of your parents bought it for you.
Right, probably in like 67 or so.
Wow.
Because by the time Yellow Submarine came out, I saw Yellow Submarine in the theater, got the album, used to bring the album to school in first grade, and the rest is history. After that started everything.
Wow.
Did they buy it for you knowing that it wasn't the Beatles, or did they see the cover and say, it'll do? You know, it's not the Beatles, or maybe the Beatles were sold out or whatever.
Well, you got to remember, not to be funny, Mitch, but the Chipmunks had hits already.
Right.
Yes,
You know,
but chances are, well, maybe, you know what? Maybe Bob's parents, I'm going to call you Rob or Bob, whichever.
I had other Chipmunks albums too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but man, maybe the parents heard, like, you know, Witch Doctor by Dave Seville. Maybe you heard.
Yeah.
Maybe they heard the Christmas song.
Yeah.
So you're right. They could have heard that, but chances are most adults would probably not have heard the Chipmunks quote hits.
Yeah.
And may have
But
just
that one,
their kid, knowing, first of all, you're a kid and it's Beatles, so he'll like it.
I do think it was a nice way to introduce the Beatle music to kids that way.
Oh, yeah.
As you see, when we discuss later, there were others that tried to mimic the actual Chipmunks record as well. So it shows that even the mimic get mimicked.
The parodying the satire or vice versa.
Right.
He talks.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that Mitch and I were talking about this afternoon, and I think it's sort of important to throw into this conversation, is that these records where you sort of had an exploitation of a band like the Beatles that were everywhere, top of the charts, so incredibly prolific, showing up on American television, etc. Something like this could only have happened during that generation when there was such a wide, quote, generation gap. Because once you get to the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that, parents, in the mid to late 70s, we had the supermarket records, we had the sound effects present the music of 1976 or whatever it was. And parents would fall for that because they just didn't know. They didn't know that wasn't the real hit version of Benny and the Jets, or what have you. So they'd buy the sound-alike records. But do you agree? These were sort of like records were of their time. Like, I don't think, like now, parents and sometimes kids and parents and even grandparents listen to the same music. They listen to the same genres. Aerosmith, grandma, daughter, and granddaughter are all going to know what Aerosmith looks and sounds like because they got the interweb and they all know the sound, the songs from the radio. But at this time, this was all new. The kids were rock and roll, and you had parents that were mostly still Perry Como and Frank Sinatra or
Bobby Rydell.
I know your folks were very into country music too, right?
Right.
So this was all new territory for them.
Well, think of who was buying what in the way of music. Kids with their language, their allowance. They mostly bought 45s. That was the big deal for them to run out and grab a 45. That's how even there was a lot of Beatle
novelty
type of records out. That weren't the Beatles, tribute stuff like Ringo for President or what have you. And this stuff isn't even that. This is something quite otherwise. It was parents who bought the albums. Albums before the Beatles were considered as either loss leaders or they were just a showcase. Well, now you've gotten a picture of the artist, and maybe you'll like a few of the other songs. The big sellers prior were really soundtrack albums. In fact, a lot of your budget, fake, phony albums prior to the Beatles were a lot of soundtrack albums.
That's true. That's
were fake soundtracks. Yeah. There were fake Mitch Miller albums. Mitch Miller, Sing Along with Mitch. There was a lot of ones with that. Not this Mitch, but you could sing along with him if you wanted.
But Sing Along with Bitch really didn't go over well. That was one of the fake ones they tried, but the parents weren't grabbing that one. For
too many people related to it.
Too many people related.
Too many husbands were like, I do it every night.
and mind you, there were, I do have attempted sound-alikes and look-alikes of the Kingston Trio.
Seriously?
Yeah. I have a couple. Well, there's the Beach Boys also was one that by the Surfsiders, who no less has Lou Reed singing on it.
That ties in directly with the Beatles stuff too, because a few of those releases and some of the ones we're going to look at in Beatle world were on Pickwick, which had come right. We're recording this in Long Island.
Right.
All of us are on Long Island, and Pickwick was right here over in Freeport.
Right.
And Lou Reed was being asked to write surf music, parodies. So I'm sure there were some like Long Island songwriters that contributed to those Pickwick Beatle records too.
I wanted to bring up something because Bob, you said something that really just resonated with me. The 45s were the thing that people were buying, and as we know, like you said, I think there's over 100 Beatles novelty 45s. Even Cher got into it. That was her first record.
Nelson.
Bonnie Joe Mason. Yeah. But, I just realized there were no real, like a couple of these bands that we'll talk about, the budget bin bands or albums, had some singles, but no, I haven't seen any picture sleeves of any 45. Like the album had the pictures on them, but none of the 45s
Well, they were going
Weird.
for the equivalent of the big buck, because I think the
Yeah,
deal
I
was
guess.
that since there wasn't a ton of licensing involved, and who knows how many of these guys tried to get away with putting stuff out without even actually licensing.
Yeah.
Because if you stuck them out under the wire and you got them out in the New York metropolitan area, you probably in an area like this where there was, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but such a high population density, you probably had so many of those records selling primarily in, selling quickly and efficiently. We see thousands of copies floating around. How many of those were first bought? Probably in New York.
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah, and you'd have to think that, why go through the trouble of licensing? Nah, we made 5,000, we sold 4,500. They ain't gonna catch us now,
Well, also, there was a lot more pressing plants, small pressing plants that would do little jobs, and they could go bring it to that and say, "Oh, we need 1,000 of them." Okay.
Also, here on Long Island, even there was pressing being done here on the island.
Yeah,
But
so
a lot
would
of these
think the opposite though, because, and maybe I'm wrong, I would think these would really, and I'd love to. Well, I wouldn't love to do the research on it because it'd probably be a lot, but I would think that because the smaller, cities in the Midwest or wherever maybe didn't get the product that the big cities got.
True too.
So maybe they got, if they saw these, they'd be like, "Oh, that's the Liverpools, that's the Beatles, we'll buy it." And because they didn't get Meet the Beatles or Introducing or whatever came out. So again, just a theory, but
That's
I would think that the
possible, too.
smaller would have probably had the bigger sellers. But
right.
I guess we'll never know. These companies have been so defunct for so long. Their records,
Were a lot of them East Coast based, Rob? The companies, or both?
I believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
A couple were mostly in New Jersey. You had Somerset in New Jersey too. They were part of Alshire.
Okay.
So
Okay.
a lot were from this area, right? Mostly New Jersey, of all things.
How
They
fun.
use budget vinyl to make these things. That's why sometimes when you find them, they're in terrible shape. Not because whoever had them did a job on them, but no, they just weren't the greatest of pressings. But you have to remember, you have to look at all the covers of these things. Think about how if you get a mailing, especially, and no, I'm not going into politics, but if you get a political mailer in the mail, and it's like a two-sided cardboard ad for something about the particular politician, or it says all this list of stuff that they will do and the list of stuff that their opponent won't do. They don't expect you to read that. What they just expect is that you get the name or you get something off of it that sticks in your head, and you use that when you go to the polls. That's all they think about with that. There's
Right.
And I guess the records would be the same way,
The records would be the same. These albums came out, they weren't really being, maybe other than arguably the Chipmunks, but they weren't really being promoted to attract your daughter. They were put out to attract you, the cheapskate father or mother who decided that $2.98 or whatever at Woolworths for Meet the Beatles was too expensive.
Yeah.
But here, you're a shopper at Bohack or A&P, and there's a record in the bin by the checkout, and you see it says, "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or "A Hard Day's Night" on the top. What do you think? Problem solved. Your daughter's been bugging you to get this record. Ooh, that's bad.
I was just about to say.
I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, that's our joke you stole, man.
Yeah.
That'd be our joke. Come on.
But that's how they got sold.
Why don't you know what? We've mentioned budget, and I think people need to understand what the quote budget bin is. So
Right.
can you explain what the budget bin was in any type of store?
It's sort of selling records at a lower price. A couple of the budget labels, like even Diplomat said on the back cover, quality music need not be expensive. So they used it as a way just to attract people. I guess it's like, with us shopping. Do you go to Neiman Marcus or do you go to Walmart? It's
I
just
go to Dollar Tree.
the idea is saving some money.
And I think it's about the venues too. I think, Mitch, it was the idea that, grandma and grandpa weren't, you and I were just talking today about where record stores were found.
Right.
It's possible that grandma and grandma may have wandered into Corvettes.
Grandma and grandma?
Grandma and grandma, progressive grandma, but
Wow.
grandma and grandpa may have wandered into Corvettes. But the truth was grandma and grandpa were always at, and Rob, I think you said the perfect, Bohacks. I mean, you were there.
That's an old supermarket.
My dad,
I was there.
My dad would go to Maze, and the difference was too that growing up, I always found that records like the ones that we're talking about were in the supermarket bins, as opposed to if you went to Maze or Woolworths or Kreska's, you found cutouts. You found records from legitimate labels with legitimate artists that had been discontinued, they cut the corner in their 44 cents. Right. These things, I remember these as being in the A&P, as being in, literally supermarkets. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, down south, gas stations too, right? Right, Bob?
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, I think there were gas stations.
Drug stores, even hardware stores.
Yes, even, the hardware stores, right.
Even Radio Shack, I remember having a bin. Yeah. And where, even if you went to a legit record store or a department store, where did they usually have these budget records? Outside of the department. Why? Yes. Because the people that they attracted were not ones that were going to go into the actual department. They just looked or just happened to catch in their eye with something on these records.
Yeah.
What's funny is, as you'll see as we go on, there's some of these albums I'm like, who even bought these in the first place?
Well, my question for you, Rob, is what was the price difference? What were if I'm guessing right, it was like $288 on sale for Beatles something new. But how much were these going for? Was it $1.98, $8.99? What was the
right?
What was the main attraction to Grandma and Grandpa, we'll say, in the saving of money?
Well, I have. I'm looking at. I'm not going to show it on the screen, but I have Beatlemania in the USA by the Liverpools with a sticker on it for 88 cents.
Wow!
Okay, wow! That's a big.
Wow!
Back then, that's a big savings,
and not worth even that. No, but
a bargain at any price.
But you know what though, we've said it, but I think the cost was probably secondary, or maybe neck and neck with the real thing here, with the real reason people bought them, because the grandma and grandpa didn't know. They just didn't know. As Rob said, look at my background right now. There's silhouettes. This is what half of the albums look like. So you go in and you see that, and grandma and grandpa assume it's the Beatles, and they buy it now. And yes, the cost is less. But chances are, if they don't go to Corvettes or somewhere, they're not even going to know there's a cost savings. They're just going to make their kid happy by buying something that is the Beatles, and they don't know until you get home and the kid says, "This ain't the Beatles." So I think that might be more of the reason these things actually sold, because, as Rob alluded to prior to us recording, there were 1,000 Beatle records released in '64. So these all got put in with the rest, and the kids knew what wasn't and what was, but the parents, who Rob said bought the things, they didn't. So they see Mop Tops, they say, "That's good enough. I got my kid a Beatle record."
It was a very confusing year. Nobody expected them to last the year. That's why we have A Hard Day's Night in black and white. Thank goodness. I like it in black and white. But they didn't even know whether that was going to be released. So there you go.
And don't forget also, Rob, you in the article you also say, and we know, the first Beatles pirated record, the original Greatest Hits, which had
that's
the
incredible.
Yeah, which had the 4 mop tops on it. And if you bought that thinking, all right, it's good enough, well, you came home and you got lucky because that actually was the Beatles. So it was confusing for everybody. It's like, okay, I can buy Beatle Rama, it looks just like my background, and I can buy the original greatest hits, which looks just like my background. One of them's the Beatles and one of them ain't, you know? So,
of course, no one in that area was able to find combs for a lot of years because that's what they were melting down to actually make all these crap records.
Well,
I mean, but I was wondering though, because we're talking about 64 and we're talking about the Beatles themselves, but do you think it also, and maybe I'm giving too much credit, but do you think it also might have confused Grandma and Grandpa? Because by the time we got toward the end of 64, the British invasion was underway. So do you think it was also possible that maybe in a lot of cases, it was kind of like, oh, my kids love the Beatles, and here's this Bugs group from Liverpool. They like all this British crap that's out now. Right. You know,
hey, don't make fun of Freddie and the Dreamers, okay?
I'm telling you now. Anyway,
don't tell us anymore.
I think that was secondary, sure, because there were a couple of albums come 65. One I'm thinking of with the cover that has a Beatles looking cartoon called That English Sound. And it shows, again, it wasn't just the Beatles on there. There's Herman's Hermits, Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Animals. I mean, it's all not the real artist. But at that point, they started to put out stuff that wasn't just
Beatles. Exactly, yeah, but I'm even just thinking of them like, you know, mistaking some of these, you know, cleverly named, you know, well, this could very well be a group from Liverpool, you know, right. One of these Demdar records that my kid's going to like, knowing it wasn't the Beatles, but figuring, oh, they like Peter and Gordon and Harry and Johnny and Phil and whoever else is coming over there. And,
right.
You know, Jimmy and the Farters, whatever. And, you know, we'll buy them this one, you know.
Yes.
Well, while we brought up that album, The Greatest Hits, I just want to let Rob tell us what's special about that record that was different. We know it's a pirated album, but what was on there that hadn't been released yet?
The cover was this nice gold cover with like Mitch's background on it, but it does not state anywhere on the cover or the label what band it is. I happened to find it at a store in Hicksville in like the early 70s. When I played it, the weirdest thing was I put on Love Me Do, and it's the Love Me Do that Ringo plays on. It's not the one on the album. I never heard it before that. So I was like, what is this?
That's funny.
And then I think, I'm not sure of the dates, so the timeline might be off, but Capital of Canada put it out, and I think they put out the Ringo one as well. So, you know, it's so odd that you're now getting a real Beatle record, so to speak, and something you've never heard. So that was kind of cool about that one.
Yeah. And supposedly that one, because it was basically a pirate, right? Would you call that a pirate?
Yeah, that's a pirate record, yeah.
They
Why
did
don't we
go
explain
after
pirate,
that
by
one.
the way? I'm sorry, Bob. Tony, can you explain pirate just so people know what we mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got the three things that are always confused. God bless you, Bill Clinton. But you've got the three things that were always confused, which was bootleg recording, which means a release of something that has never been released before and is usually unauthorized for release at all by the artist. Then you've got a counterfeit, which just think of a counterfeit dollar bill. There's a real dollar bill and someone makes a fake dollar bill. There were millions of copies of Abbey Road, Introducing the Beatles, Let It Be. Those are the three big victimized Beatles records. All of the Taiwan releases, those people call them Taiwanese bootlegs. They could also be called Taiwanese counterfeits, even though they looked unique. They were direct knockoffs of, you know. And then pirates are usually compilations. A pirate record would be Alpha Omega, would be the Beatles' greatest hits. The gold one would be, you know, compilations or collections of things that aren't for real. So, you know, but anyway,
nice.
And then there's this stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, the exploitation records.
Yeah.
So again, as I mentioned earlier, it's the adults that were buying this, and soundtrack albums usually sold for like $1 more than the regular albums.
Right.
Even back then. So if people were collecting or wanting to hear soundtrack albums back then, there always were copies of stuff. I remember, even my parents had like the Jesus Christ Superstar was like some whatever knockoff of it. It wasn't the real.
We had Fiddler on the Roof on. Yeah, we had Fiddler on the Roof on Diplomat. Yeah.
There you go.
Same kind of thing.
And those were the things that people bought because it was easy and it was cheaper.
And also, I think part of it is it was about the song as much as about the artist. And the Beatles changed that where you had to hear the artist's version of the original song. I think that was a major thing because, it's like getting sheet music and then singing along with your friends or your family. It's not the original, but you're singing I Want to Hold Your Hand or whatever.
But it's also... You go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. He's made a real good point with that because that's part of the crux of these things. Like my mother back in the 60s had some Beatles sheet music. She was like, well, I'm going to sit down at the piano and try to play it. And yeah, she knew the notes. She knew the chords or whatever. But the beat or the rhythm of the song, couldn't get it at all.
Right.
And that's the funny thing about a lot of these records. These bands or whoever they were that they threw together to make these records, some of them are decent cover. They probably were rushed to finish whatever they could. Here's one take of it in here. Let's put it on the record.
And we're done. Right.
But most of them, just like no clue, absolutely no clue of how the Beatles were. So when you think of the name and the beat and the beatnik and being a cool happening, they don't have it. They're not happening.
Also, some of that sheet music was totally in the wrong key.
Well,
if it was the right key at all, or the right notes, or
it was cheat too.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Bob. The other thing too is that on a few of those records that you sent us, there was one in particular actually. Well, I was talking to Mitch yesterday, and I said I would have gone to see those guys as like a Beatles cover band. There's one that you sent where they cover like "For Me to You," "Please Please Me," and they do really decent jobs at covering the tracks.
Oh yeah, some of them they really try. Some of them aren't too bad.
Yeah.
Probably the best-selling one and the one that most people would know is the Bugs.
Right.
And long story with that. I mean, first of all, it was a real band who made the record. Was it the Coachman 5?
Okay.
And it turns out that reportedly Gary Wright is playing on that album.
Wow.
Yeah, well,
that's kind of cool.
They were a band, that band, the Coachman 5, actually, it was weird because when I looked this up, because I knew that Gary Wright was allegedly on it, and he's from New Jersey, and the whole band was from Jersey. But they had a single that was a different band than the band that did the album that we're going to talk about. So it's really, very weird. And they practiced in Nyack, New York, and then they, it wasn't like long, but to your point, they figured it sounds okay, and people are going to buy it anyway because right now the Beatles are hot, and so we'll sell some. But very, very odd, and also some of these, even though it says "She Loves You" or "Please Please Me," some of them were actually songs mocking those songs, and they called it "She Loves You." Because they weren't, even though some of them sang "She Loves Me," but they didn't want to. Obviously, you have to keep the names, so at least that's right. So if someone's reading it, it's okay. I know the song "She Loves You" or "I Want to Hold Your Hand," but a lot of them, when you listen to them, they're not even that song. It's just a mocking song. They mock the Beatles or they mock the song. So just these are very weird albums.
Rob. One of the things I noticed about this, and I want to ask you, how many of them look like real albums in the sense of listing publishing or producers or band members or anything? How many of these are just like really generic without any mentions of, Northern Songs or Adam or Beechwood or, no, none?
That's what I suspected. That's what I suspected.
And then there's a couple that are all on the same label, but they changed the packaging. On the cover, it'll say, it's by the Schoolboys, or one says it's the
Liverpool Kids,
the Liverpool Lads or something.
Kids,
and then Liverpool Kids. And then, you look at the label and it says something else, or the back it says the
on the label, the Schoolboys,
Schoolboys. So, and
for those listening,
that's a way to fake you out, because you're seeing the word Liverpool on the cover,
right?
And then you obviously it's sealed. You can't look at the label. And then when you get home and there ain't no Liverpool on that, it just says the Schoolboys. And it turns out to be these guys or old guys or young guys from New Jersey, who had no idea how to sound like the English.
It was also probably a way to get people who were creeping around any pressing plants that were trying to keep their reputations. If you put a Liverpoolish name, or if you put the Beatleites, on a record, and there's a song called "She Loves You," it's going to obviously raise a lot of eyebrows.
Right.
If you're going to go get a record pressed, and it's by the Cadillacs or something, and you've got a bunch of song titles, and one of them is "I Want to Hold Your Hand," no one's going to go, it's some guy covering a Beatles song, we better be careful. They're going to be like, yeah, whatever. So they probably tried to avoid some of that Liverpool related stuff on the record labels to maybe save, some issues with the pressing plants and stuff. But
the one thing I also wanted to bring into it is that all the ones we're going to talk about starting very soon are albums that the Beatles were not on the cover at all, or in the back or anything. But and this is not one that we were going to cover, but after doing some research, I just want to bring it up very briefly. In 1965, and Bob, you mentioned that they really weren't promoted that well, other than like the Chipmunks, who had the money, Liberty Records, they had hits, they were in Billboard. But 1965, Tower Records, the label, put out an album called "Sing a Song with the Beatles." Jimmy Haskell and the band. It was the first album on Tower, and it had a full-page ad in Billboard on March 6, 65. So this was promoted, and this was really an exploitation this was a fake out, because the Beatles on the cover is in big words and in big letters, big font, and there's pictures of the individual Beatles playing live.
Wow.
So, even though it's Jimmy Haskell and band, but I'm looking at it, and I remember seeing this. It goes for
that's on Tower. Isn't Tower another budget label of Capitol?
Capitol. There's a weird irony there. That was just going through my head. You were saying
Capitol promoted themselves, so to speak.
Well, why wouldn't
Beetle? I know.
Why wouldn't Capitol do something completely deceptive? And I mean, come on, it's Capitol we're talking about.
But that's like even on the back of the.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Even on the back of the Beatle albums, they would list the Beatles songbook by the Holly Ridge Strings.
Right.
That's right.
Well, that's a Capitol release, right? Which
at the same time, I have one says the Mustangs play the Beatles songbook, and the cover is brown versus the Liverpool blue one being blue, but they look exactly the same.
Yeah, that's just bizarre. There's so much money to be had, I guess, in '64, especially. I mean, obviously in 65 and 6, they were still huge, but they were huge the whole time. But 64, everybody always says, if you can go back in time, when would you go back? I said probably March of 64, right after Can't Buy Me Love came out, so I could buy up all those sleeves in the East Coast.
Nice.
For the 79 cents, and then I could go to Woolworths if I had the money I had now and just buy everything out. But 64 obviously was the year to make all the money. So even though later on in Beatles, history, there were some more of these things, most of them did say Lennon and McCartney or the Beatles, where none of these in 64, if I'm not mistaken, said the Beatles. It might have, there's one I think that spelled Beattle. That's the Bugs. Wasn't it the Bugs one?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
you know,
but Beatles, but two thoughts come to mind. First of all, we mentioned Pickwick earlier. Pickwick was doing Beatles exploitative stuff well into the 60s. I mean, they were releasing Beatles sound-alike stuff in 67, to go with Magical Mystery Tour and the Pepper.
yeah, but what was on the cover?
The cover was usually psychedelic imagery, but by then, Magical Mystery Tour showed the Beatles dressed up as animals. The White Album, as the Spinal Tap would say, there's nothing on that goddamn cover, nothing. So you had so many different variations that now you didn't have to even write the Beatles, and you just put, Magical Mystery Tour, or you put a song title and a colorful image. And even in 67, you were probably getting a bunch of suckers buying these records from Pickwick that were, the symphonic Beatles, and Beatles in huge letters and symphonic in half the size font.
Well, they also, Pickwick, if I'm not mistaken, they put out a exploitation record of the movie Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Yes, they sure did. But Bob, going to these collections, because we're talking about records that are selling for like 88 cents. Seriously, not to be, but even though it's a budget label, even to go in a crummy studio, I would guess everybody's got to get paid a little bit. The band, I'm sure, gets paid peanuts to just come in and play.
Right.
But are there any documents? Is there any available information to see just how many units these things really sold?
That's the problem with doing this research, is just trying to get that kind of information. Because, let's say we talked about Diplomat Records. Their parent company is Synthetic Plastics. They still technically exist, but as Peter Pan Records. If you know Peter Pan, they used to put out all the
children's,
the Budget Kitty records.
Yeah,
like I remember. You remember the store sold Pools, Harrows.
Yeah.
They used to have all the budget bins of Christmas and holiday records, and who had those? Diplomat. They had a band featuring the Candy Cane Kids or whatever, and
And wouldn't Peter Pan? Wouldn't those records knock off a lot of the Disney soundtracks?
Right. That too.
So,
and of course they were cheaper, and Kitty records were always cheaper. But those kind of albums, in the 70s, Diplomat had Power Records, where they had like stories of superheroes on different albums.
I remember that. Sure.
And those were like, cheap knockoff things too. You looked at the artwork on it. I think I have a Spider-Man one. I'm like, ew, who drew this?
But there's no, even with a company like Diplomat, I guess you're not gonna find documentation, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
To say,
right,
this many units of this, or
now after all that, personally, I don't even think Capitol gave us the right amount of sales on Meet the Beatles, but that's another story.
Right. Well, I think a lawsuit confirmed that.
Yeah. Which is why Paul wasn't.
It's always 5 million copies for Capitol. We only sold 5 million.
5 million.
Meanwhile, they said they sold 4 million by the second month of 64.
Right.
Funny, sold 1 million in the next 50 years.
It's funny. Revolver Records in New York sold 6 million of the same record, and anyway.
That was out of a trunk.
What's Revolver Records? Well, that's some place we've all been to together. Speaking of our history, Bob, I got a question for you. Is there any reports of any of these records being played on the radio? As maybe
a question, Bob.
A mistake, or maybe
right. Other than as a gag, but because like years later, even bands that the Beatles had a really, really small connection to, like let's say Grapefruit. I know I've heard tapes of songs by Grapefruit being played on the radio, and underneath it says exclusive Beatles, because they were trying to pull whatever they could out of the blue and claim it had a Beatle connection to try to get people to listen. Oh, we got to listen to XLY because WABC doesn't have this song and they do, and we got to hear it.
So over the years, Rob, did any of these songs from any of these records end up as like we
I don't think budget bin type of albums got airplay
but
like
I'm just
that.
thinking like too, like for instance,
did the novelty singles get a lot of airplay?
Well, you got to figure, I mean, there were stations that, like you're saying, Have You Heard the Word, LS Bumblebee, those records did get played of, we don't know for sure.
Well, We Love You Beatles by the Carefrees.
Well, yeah,
right.
yeah, but I have
got a lot of airplay.
But I have to wonder whether or not, like, did any of these, the Bugs and any of these guys, did these records get picked up even as, maybe it's really them? Like, did anybody, like, I've never seen any of those songs turn up on any of those compilations of, is it really them?
Right.
And I guess, is it because they were just so, these knockoff records were so high profile? Is that why,
It seems more the 45s. Like, you mentioned Have You Heard the Word? There's People Say, and Back With I'm Walking by John and Paul. Yeah. There was even, what was it? The Beat Merchants doing So Fine. People thought that was Beatles. Neanderthal Man by Hot Legs, they thought was the Beatles. It seemed everything that
Black 2
got that was on a 45.
Right.
It's like, I guess that was an easy way to disguise it, because if there was no picture sleeve or no picture. But most of these records had no picture either. And when they did, it sure wasn't the people singing on them. And once you talk about the absurd covers that came out too, oh my goodness. You're like,
Rob, are there any one in particular where you actually would say, you know what, this actually has some on its own, has some actual musical merit, and be like, all right.
Oh yeah, I love the Liverpools album on Winecoat. That has some good songs. The Manchesters actually do have a couple of good songs. Whirring Blues is good. I'm Waiting is a great song. There's definitely songs on there that are worth their own merit. Does it sound like the Beatles? No. I mean, if you listen to Pete Best's album, that Best of the Beatles on Savage Records, that's kind of what this stuff sounds like. It comes off like that. His stuff really wasn't.
Talk about exploitative.
Yeah, well, at least he was on it.
Right.
Well, his name was Best.
Yeah,
but if it, so that's the only reason. He was on it.
So Bob, some of these records weren't all Beatle covers. They might have been a couple, and then there's other songs.
Right? And then they either let the band throw a song or two on, or one of their in-house songwriters got a chance to get something out. And when talking about like the Manchesters, like I said, those songs, they were used again and again and again, where the backing track was used for another sound alike, and then another sound alike. So they just used those same songs.
It was like Motown. Same backing, just put the Supremes in front, or the Four Tops in front, that's wild.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Jimi Hendrix when he worked with Curtis Knight and the Squires, where he came in and he was part of instrumentals, and that might have been one song, but then they changed lyrics. It might have been one song, and they said, well, we'll just change the lyrics. No one will know because we changed it around enough. That's what it sounds like a little bit,
Well, then you have the horrid cover of the Bugs, even though it's the best example of any of these. The back cover of the songs, they just like change the titles, and the titles have nothing to do with the song, like Mersey Mercy, or I'm trying to remember some of the others on there. Is it
London Town Swing?
Right. And one of the songs is Just One Look. You know it by Doris Troy or the Hollies, but it's not listed on the back cover. It has another name attached to it.
Soho Mash.
So you avoid paying copyright. That's all.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way.
So why don't we talk about a bunch of them since?
Yes.
You think there's some kid walking around here now from like 45 years ago who goes, damn, I wish I could find a copy of that song Soho Mash. I really love that. Like, not, anyway.
Well, it's
you know what?
interesting.
Well, Mitch, I have one more question from Rob, and then we'll start.
Well, Rob,
when
wait. Bob was just going to say something. So
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, you.
No,
That's right.
no, I'm sorry.
Say what are you going to say?
A couple in my search of finding these, and some of these, I bought a couple of different copies just to find, one either in a better shape or what have you. A couple of them, I've had pictures from either a magazine, newspaper, or whatever of the actual Beatles cut out and taped onto the record cover. So that shows you that whoever owned it really wanted that to be a Beatle record, and maybe that was the record that was given to them, and just like, well, Suey, this is what you're getting. You're not getting anything else. That's your Beatle record. And then just like, okay, I guess I'll just have to be used to it.
Oh, that poor kid. Now I'm going to go cry. That's like the sad. Wow, man.
Listen, I'm one of those kids because I don't remember what year it was, but it was definitely later in the 60s. It might have even been 70, 71. My mother came home one day after going to, I think, Lafayette Electronics Store in Syosset on Long Island. And she came home and there was a picture, and I know the cover, a picture of a beetle. I think it was actually a ladybug, and it was a huge ladybug on the cover, and it had all the Beatle titles, on the cover. And she bought it and said, I got you a new Beatle record. And I put it on, and it was all instrumental versions by someone I had no idea. So, I was one of those. So, Tony, if you want to buy me a Beatle record, you can.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I'm sorry, little Mitchie.
It's all right,
little Mitchie.
I never grew up. So,
Anyway.
So why don't we, you said you had one question.
I have one more question, Rob, before we get into the going through some of these.
Well, we've been going through some of them.
I know, but we didn't. I didn't talk about them. We all have, as collectors and fans and historians of the Beatles, we all have our little thing. Mitch likes the 45s. I like to get some covers. Tony has a lot of interests. When did this become an interest to you, these Beatle exploitation records? Because you have, 40, 50 of them. When did this become, I got to get these every time I see them? When did it not take over, but when did it impress you more that you had to...
Rob, when he found out that you could spend $750 on a butcher,
right,
who would pay $750 and buy every one of these albums.
And $7.50. What you meant is, no, I'm kidding.
Yes. When do you remember saying, I got to start, getting these exploitation records?
I always like to tend to go into the esoteric of various things. If I buy comic books, yes, I have Marvel and DC, but sometimes I like to look at what some of the other comic book companies are doing, or things that came out on like some budget comic book company that really isn't that great, but I happen to like it just because it exists.
Like the superhero, like Bob likes Mr. Spider-Man, who's just a guy who just, anyway,
some Jewish guy.
Some Jewish guy.
Hello.
Mr. Spider-Man,
I use my matzo balls as my thing.
Sorry, Bob.
A hammer, I have matzo balls.
No, it's all right.
Couldn't resist. Anyway. But
I mean, I have pets. What do I have? I have a couple of reptiles and hermit crabs and stuff. I don't have a dog and cat.
That's true,
Don't tell people you have crabs.
That's true.
No, but you know what, Bob? You've always, I know you've turned me on to a few things too. Like, I know you've turned me on to 101 Strings. You've turned me on, I think, to Esquivel, right? I mean,
yes.
I had no idea who and now you can't buy an Esquivel it's a lot of money. Yeah, an original, and they started re-releasing them. But so you've always had an eclectic, collection of things other than the mainstream stuff, which obviously you collect too.
Look at some books that are around me. They're eclectic too.
You definitely, yes. But you know what? To Rob's point, if you were born in 64, born in 54, or whatever, and you're 10 and getting these from your parents, that's one thing. But to start collecting these, knowing that it's not the Beatles and that they probably suck, or at least
almost makes it more fun, in my opinion.
Yes, does it?
Like, I think. I mean, I don't know.
That's a good point. You know going in it's not going to be the Beatles or even close.
Whether it's going to give you a laugh or, like I said, in the case, I went through some of the links that you sent, Bob, and some of them you just went, ooh, Yeah. But other stuff, like I said, particularly a few of the covers, I just went, you know what? This was like a bunch of musicians who just thought to themselves, like, while they're sitting there doing their version of Please Please Me, they're going, we're going to be on a record. Holy Jesus. Like, and it was great. And they're playing their hearts out. And then you get the people where it's like, you hear going through their heads, oh my God, I went to Juilliard for this. Like, that
Sure.
These people are actually musos and they're being relegated to getting paid, $11 for a session, to
no royalties.
Well, look what we have now. Major artists are coming out and appearing live somewhere for a couple $100. But now, what do? We go and we see a cover band playing that stuff.
Yeah.
At the price of a ticket we used to pay to see the real artist years ago. So we're sort of doing the same thing.
Supposed to be the real artist, like Foreigner, which has no
original members,
real bands anymore, and with no members, and we're paying regular ticket prices like we pay for $80, $90, $100,
and conversely, here we are talking about this being done to the Beatles, and we've got to remember, and folks, for those listening to us who are overseas, we've got to look at the idea that in the UK, this was out in the open, but this was huge. I mean, you had whole labels. I mean, nowadays, if you're an Elton John fan, now talk about collecting it from the angle that Bob's collecting. I'm in the UK dumpster diving to find records on Avenue Records and these were called supermarket albums because basically
records.
You went to the supermarket and no, you weren't getting the original artists doing Neanderthal Man and doing Bridge Over Troubled Water. You were getting a bunch of studio people and the man singers doing contemporary hits of the day. So instead of what's that?
Or you could get Elton John doing contemporary hits of the day.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly what I'm saying. Right. So here it is. It just so happens that the only name that we have from these American records is Gary Wright. In England, you had a lot of people who ended up being really famous musicians who, for to pay their mortgage, like Elton, we're going in and recording for these hack labels that were doing these, top hits of 1969. And so it's wild how we look at them differently.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Hey, sorry, Bob. Let me just, Rob, let me ask Bob one more question. Because we asked, I want to follow up with why you started doing this. Is it also easier or harder or more fun to collect these? Because Beatle records are everywhere. I could go on eBay and find I Feel Fine 45 picture sleeve everywhere. I could have my choice of what condition I want. As a collector, I always love the thrill of the hunt. And with these, I'm assuming that the thrill of the hunt is still there for you, because I know you could buy them on eBay, but if you're not doing that or other auction sites, is this harder or easier to find these records?
Right. I think it's harder. Like, I was shocked when I found this one. It looks sort of like the Meet the Beatles cover. All it says on it is Gene, and it's by Gene and the Notes. It says in big print on the top, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it says it's the Beatles song. Why it just says the Beatles song. The Beatles is like in a cloud. And then it has caricatures again of like the Mop Tops. And it has basically the songs from with the Beatles. I mean, they even do Don't Bother Me on this album.
Wow. That's interesting.
But
so
there's no liner notes. The front cover's the same as the back. So I'm assuming it's either really, really budget, or some band decided to put out the album that way.
But do you find them in the Beatles? Like if you're at a record show, are they in the Beatles section? Are people savvy that way, or are they just with every other record and you happen to pull something out?
Sometimes, or now they're thrown in with the incredibly strange music section.
Okay.
But even popular artists think about the fact how, and Tony mentioned about the British versus America, and I know that's going to be another show, but just seeing the mania of the albums that came out from Capitol, United Artists, VJ, Atco, MGM, et cetera, it just left the door wide open for others to come in and throw this stuff at your faces. Everybody just wanted to try to make a buck out of it. Even your contemporary artists. I mean, one of the reasons the band, the Beau Brummels, called themselves the Beau Brummels is so that when you were in a record store, BEAU came after BEAT.
Right.
Very smart.
Right. Absolutely.
And they knew they'd be on the Flintstones.
It doesn't mean they're a bad group. They're fantastic, but
yeah,
it just happened to work it that way.
Clever marketing.
Yeah,
it is clever. And you know what? It was clever enough where, and I joked about being on the Flintstones, but you're not going to be able to use the Beatles on the Flintstones, but you can use the Beau Brummel Stones.
Right.
And because they actually, they sounded good. They had good stuff. And you know what? I guarantee you that Hanna-Barbera, again, was thinking we'll exploit the Liverpool sound, so to speak, even though, where were the Beau Brummels from?
San Francisco.
Yeah. So they weren't even, but
I was going to say Bedrock, but
twist. No, but I mean, but again, on the show, the Beau Brummel Stones had the Beatle mop tops.
Yes. And totally different question, Mitch, and question for another story. But even if they wanted to try to license the Beatles, they wouldn't have been able to, I would imagine, because King Features had their animated
already
at the same time. So anyway.
But Eppie Brystone was on the Flintstones, so
that's true.
He was, but they, don't forget the Flintstones was 60 to 66.
Yeah.
So
Now,
I'm not sure. I think the Beau Brummel Stones was on probably in 64 or 5.
Now that's a whole other topic, which I guess, I don't know if we could breach this but Bob, you're a pop culture person in general, obviously. And
yes.
Around that same time, 64, 65, and I'm thinking of a few different instances, but weren't there also a few instances of popular TV shows getting a band on that was obviously supposed to
absolutely.
So, there's a whole other side of that same type of exploitation.
Right. I'm thinking F Troop, the Munsters.
There you go. Yeah.
Although
Dick Van Dyke Show.
but
Van Dyke Show had the Redcoats on. It was Chad and Jeremy. So.
Right, but it was really Chad and Jeremy.
Right.
That's so that was kind of cool. But all right, so why don't we go through some of these, because some of these have some really interesting things. I know we've talked about it, but do you want to start with the Bugs? Because I think this one has a lot of really cool info on it. And Bob, I think it's just called Beetle Beat the Bugs, and it's obviously spelled BEE because you're not going to pay EEA.
Right. And that's up at the top of the cover.
Yep.
And it's in like at least this copy I'm looking at is green neon, so it just attracts you. And of course it says featuring "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
The Bugs, though.
Of course it lies. It says it's the original Liverpool sound and recorded in England.
Right.
Wow.
On the Jersey shores of England, I jumped in the Jersey, but it looks like rain.
You know what, though? It's pretty funny because, like I said, they rehearsed the material at Scotty's Bar in Nyack. And then decided it was ready to go. The one thing about this was that they were a band, and they did they were upset later on when the same company put out their album under a different name, using Boots a Go-Go, because obviously they couldn't start doing Beatles anymore. But this one I was reading up on, and it's kind of cool because Devo's Mark Mothersbaugh said that this was his first album.
This was his first record, yeah.
Yeah, thinking it was, he said, one track pissed me off so much, it eventually inspired the nasty Devo song, You Got Me Bugged.
Wow.
How funny is that? One of these was actually so, influential, so to speak, in a bad way, to Devo, who became huge.
I actually like that song. I thought You Got Me Bugged is a great song on here.
Well, that inspired the Bugs to do their record Jocko Buggo, which was actually
oh God,
sorry, the handful of Devo fans just face planted.
Well, I have to say this album with the Bugs looks very nice. There was a thought process that they were going to do the shadowing of the faces, and they had the dark collared shirts, and is not that this looks like the Beatles, but if you're not paying attention, this is maybe the best cover out of all of them.
But Rob, you just hit it on the head. If you're not paying attention,
yes, well,
and
who's paying attention?
If you think of that, the reason even on the back cover where the titles of the songs were changed and stuff,
right?
Think about it. This goes back to exploitation in other means. Look up things about drive-in theaters and the one company that made movies. Is it AIP?
Yeah, American International Pictures.
Yes.
They would have an artist draw up a movie poster before the movie was even started to get filmed.
Yeah.
So the idea, the astonishing thing that was supposed to happen is there on this poster that you would go to see, and then you'd see the movie and you're like, what is this dreck? So
that was just Michael Landon with bad hair. What's going on?
No, Michael Lembeck.
No, Michael Lembeck was the other. That's true. Michael Lembeck and
Harvey Lembeck. Michael is his son. I'm sorry.
I bet beyond a shadow of a doubt that this album cover was likely designed before they even threw the record in there.
Oh, I'm sure. But it's thought out though. This was thought out. It's like that phony one that's supposed to be the Chipmunks, which I actually have, which has A Hard Day's Night and All My Loving, and it's not the Chipmunks. They don't even say who they are. It's on Winecoat Records. That's all.
Yeah.
Do they speed up?
It was supposed to be the Chipmunks, but Alvin had gone on a bender the night before.
Yeah.
So they had to get like 3 other insects, 3 other animals to come in and actually do it. But anyway.
Chipmunk Nickel, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. That one that Rob mentioned, they couldn't say that it was the Beatles, and they also couldn't say that this is the
it
Chipmunk,
wasn't.
Right.
Because another copyright to worry about. So it's just hilarious that they use that.
But the Beatle beat of the Bugs, the cover does sort of look like, I want to say, Meet the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because it's, even though they're showing full body of the band, it still has that that
well, they're shaded on the back cover, so back cover looks like the Meet the Beatles picture.
I think if the Beatles didn't, if Robert Freeman didn't come in with just the facials, he could have done this. He could have said, "Okay, let's sit down, and we'll still do the shadow thing, but sit down." He went for the facial thing, which worked better, but it's not a bad cover. I mean, this one is, I think, maybe the best out of all of them.
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, I understand the parents are buying it and they really don't know what those long-haired guys look like, but this one especially, because they're not drawings and stuff, it's real people. If you brought this home and little Susan or little Bobby really loved Paul or Ringo or George, they're going to know right away that this was not.
Yeah, they're going to
absolutely. I just looked up something just for my own edification, but I was going to ask a question, because one thing that struck me is that here are these artists, or I'm using the term very loosely. Here are these groups that are throwing the Beatles name around like crazy, And I realized I just hopped on board because it struck me that, wait a minute, but in 1987, when the CDs came out, the Beatles name was trademarked. It was not trademarked before then. I thought it had been trademarked really early on. I was like,
Wow.
how are they getting away with this? Because the Beatles had a trademark name. So if you started seeing these records, couldn't you just start throwing out injunction after injunction after? But,
most of them didn't say the Beatles.
But a lot of them did.
Most of them didn't. It said Beetle, like BEE or BEATTLE, or they just said, Mop Tops or, the Bugs or whatever, or Beetle Rama.
But there are certain things you can use even if it's trademark. Like the one for Beetle Rama, that's a word. So even though it's spelled BEAT, there's a trademark, free use, fair use, I guess.
Or Beetle tunes. Seriously.
Or Beetle songs.
Right.
Beetle tunes.
Or Beetle tracks.
Beetle tracks.
Right. Is not going against the copyright because it's not the Beatles TM.
Right. Or Abbey Lane,
or my album where it's just as one word. I am a member of the Beatles. That's what I called myself on my album.
Did you legally change your name for that?
I am a member of the Beatles. Yeah,
you had problems when you got your license.
Yeah, it was.
I used to be Mitchell Eric Axelrod. Now I'm Mitchell Eric Winston Ono Axelrod. So it's now.
But it's pronounced throat warbler mangrove, right? Yeah, there we go. For all the pythons.
One of these albums came out called Beatmania, but the A in the middle, if you look at it funny, the A looks like they're trying to make it into either an L or an E, depending on how you look at it.
They're trying to be deceptive.
Wow.
So they don't have to worry about it. Yeah. So let's talk about Beatlemania in the USA.
Beatlemania in the USA.
By the Liverpools.
That's a nice one.
That's the Winecoat one.
Yeah,
Winecoat was a budget label also for RCA, and they were promoting for a while the Dovels.
You can't stand up, or you can't sit down.
Can't sit down, yeah.
And the Bristol Stomp.
That's right. You're right. Yeah.
Yep.
And this it's funny that there's like in Mitch's background there's the four heads, but what's kind of funny is each set has a set of eyeballs underneath, and I can't tell whether they're trying to make those eyes try to resemble one of them. Right. They all look like that underneath. When me looking at this cover, I think each one of them should have a thermometer in their mouths because they look like they're sick.
Not a Klaus Forman job. No. Anyway,
there's another. Oddly enough, Bob, and not on the list we were going to talk about, but there's another thing called Beatlemania in the USA, or Beatlemania by the Schoolboys again, on Palace Records, and that's got drawings of 5 Beatles. So maybe they included either Pete Best or Stuart Sutcliffe, but I mean, it literally looks like sort of the Beatles, but then it looks like a mugshot or not a mugshot, it looks like one of those police drawings of a criminal in the middle.
Yeah, there's a couple of different copies of the cover of that. Yeah,
that's so odd. I mean, if anybody, again, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad probably don't know there's 4 Beatles because, there was Clarence as well, according to Saturday Night Live. But and this actually looks like Clarence, but if you know the Beatles, there's the Fab Four. There's not 5 of them. That would be a dead giveaway for me if you're in a budget bin and you see 5 of them on the cover. I mean, again, I know it says Beatlemania.
Wasn't there a band called the Liverpool Five?
Was there?
I don't know.
I know, but
but I do know that's also another way, Mitch, to dodge the to dodge the law. I mean, if someone did come after them and say, "Well, look at what you're doing," we're not. There's
we have
5 people. There's 5, sir. No, there's 5 people, and it's not. It's certainly not the same as the Beatles.
No, there's Bernie was in the band. So
So this Liverpool's cover, yes, in big red print it says Beatlemania, and then it has in black print in the USA, it lists 4 Beatles songs, and then it says "and others." It does state that it's the Liverpools above where it says Winecoat. But on the back cover, there is some liner notes, and it does mention, it says, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah. But in this case, it wasn't.
Wow. That's brilliant. That's
yes, it's
absolutely
brilliant, but it's not true in this case.
No, but it is really.
At least they know what they're doing.
Right.
But it's on the back cover. You're not. So if that was on the front cover, I'm not so sure it would have sold that well.
Right.
Hey, you never know.
It's on the back cover. So people,
That's too fun.
Mom and Dad and Grandma and Grandpa are not picking it up and reading the liner notes.
Oh, yeah. They have
And
to
one of
read
the
some
2 of the songs on here aren't too bad. Actually, on Winecoat, I have a surf album by a group called the Scramblers. And when you listen to that and I'm hearing the voices, I'm like, wait a minute. These are the same voices that are on the Liverpools album.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So they definitely got their use out of these particular session bands.
Do you think those guys a few years later, did they record an album by like the Jefferson Wheelchair or something like that? Like just like old Jefferson airplanes? I don't know. Anyway.
Bob, what about the Beetle Buddies? Now this one's a little different because it's 4 women on the cover. Can't get confused with this one.
This one, I really want to know who they were marketing this to. I was going to say perhaps it's to the dads, but when you look at this cover, now the ladies who are singing on this album actually don't do too bad a job, but they sure don't look like that they could be the same ones that are on the cover. Now, the ones on the cover, if you're looking at a picture of the album cover, the one to the left kind of looks a little like Kay Ballard. Right?
Hey, she loved the Beatles. She loved the Beatles.
But I'm wondering, my thought is that they are wives of some of the executives at Synthetic Plastic. That's how they got on this album cover.
Maybe they were the recipients of synthetic plastics. I don't know.
Whoa.
Well, I was going to say when Bob said that chances are they're not the people who actually sang the songs. It's just like, when you call up a sex line and you're talking to someone and she says she's hot and great and she's like, 70 and doing dishes while you're talking.
I'm sorry, Mitch,
but I don't know anything.
I was just about to say, Mitch, that's a funny joke, but none of us know anything about that. So
I don't know what that's about.
I've heard.
The best and blatant thing of this record, of course, on the back, it does say fine records need not be expensive.
Yeah,
that's great.
It says these girls are cute and very talented, and we think that their names and sound will last long after the Beatles are gone.
Wow.
Yeah, long after lunch.
I love it.
The Beetle Buddies.
And of course, again, a lot of the songs on here are the same ones that are on the Manchester's albums. It's just they just have the women singing it instead of the Manchesters. So it's just another,
wow.
And that's easy to do. Yeah, that's really easy to do as a producer. You have one track for the vocals and the rest is the music.
Yeah, of course.
But if you're going to put out an album cover like this, like, what were they thinking? If you put, if they got 4 attractive girls on the Jersey Shore to come in and take a picture and look like Meet the Beatles,
right?
Wouldn't that sell far better than this?
Well, you know what the problem was, Bob? The what do you call it? The pressing plant was opening at 7 a.m. and they actually got the recordings done at like 11:30, and nobody else was around. So it was just like they just brought the wives in and went, sit there, and then they just shot that, and
put
that
a
was the
turtleneck
cover.
Sweater on and
put a turtleneck on. Yeah, the whole thing cost $1.32 for the entire.
We kid around about this, but that just shows the potential power of the Beatles, that you can put 4, let's just say relatively attractive. I'm not going to say you can put 4 plain people, and especially women. And I'm not misogynistic here. I'm just saying, if you're going to exploit the Beatles, you'd put men on the cover because the Beatles are men, as far as we know, unless on the weekend. But honestly, that's the power of the Beatles, because they thought you could stick 4 plain women on the cover and still have it sell. So that's pretty powerful if you really dig deep.
But Bob, there's something that I don't think we've sort of thought about. How many of us have had ideas? I know I had a couple of different ones where, business ideas where you sunk some money into it, and then you took an absolute bath and you went, damn, all right, that didn't go the way I thought.
Right.
Right.
I've had a couple of different business ventures where, thankfully I didn't sink all my safe, but you tried doing something, it didn't work, and you went, oops, So my question is, we're all kind of working under the pretense that these things actually did sell. I mean,
more importantly, made money.
Or made money. Whereas the truth is, someone, the guys that released that record with the more mature ladies on the cover and that could have sold 50 copies, and then the rest of the ones that they manufactured just got dumped somewhere and have made their way around
or melted into the next
into the next batch. But I'm saying, like, enough copies were around where, like, Bob and other collectors who collect this genre and people who just find it fun and go and pick it up. But we seem to be going under that idea that, wow, these guys exploited. And when you think of exploitation, you always think that person walked away going, my evil idea worked. When the truth is, these people might have lost their $1.32 that they put into making this record, and might have took an absolute bath because they did it,
right,
and went in the supermarkets, and the supermarkets went, yeah, sure, we'll put it out. The kids will never know. And they got shipped back just as many copies as they bought, like Michael Jackson's History.
A loss leader on purpose, you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the Sgt. Pepper soundtrack?
5 million and shipped back 6 million.
Yeah, but where I'm going is that, a lot of these people who took this gamble on exploiting the Beatles in '64 may have failed. These records sold a few copies at supermarkets, but we're just going under the thought that they did sell a lot and people fell for it. But maybe, like you say, the Bugs, there are a handful that we've just seen everywhere. We know that those were a successful deal, but these titles where Bob is finding these really kind of obscure things, you have to wonder if they tanked out of the box, but now they're just really fun to find because you hear things like
that's a good observation.
Well, also the other thing is, when did they come out? Did they come out in March of '64 or November of '64? And that's that's 6 months or 7 months is major, because they, at the end of the year, everyone sort of knows about this difference and the exploitation records, and maybe someone bought one and then told their parents, never buy a record again unless I'm with you, or something like that.
Sure.
So,
I think there was one that came out prior to the Beatles on Sullivan.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think there was one. I have to read up on it again, but I think there was one that either was recorded prior to Sullivan, so they must have heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in December of '63.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, I think one of them was. It showed that it was. I have to read up, and for those listeners or watchers,
Bob, you were going to say something
underneath. We'll post it underneath.
Yeah, Bob, you were going to say something just before. What were you going to say?
Oh no, just about the genre of this stuff that we really don't know how well it sold, and some of them are harder to find than others. But yeah, Tony hit something right on the head with that. I think it's another example with that.
Let me just get.
We do have some others that have weird covers that.
Yeah, we'll go.
Let me just say before, let me get back to, so we don't have to put it on the bottom.
You found it?
It was the Beatlemania by the Schoolboys on Palace, and it said the liner notes showed that this album was released just before the Beatles' appearance on Sullivan.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's kind of weird.
The schoolboy says that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow,
That's
weird.
crazy.
That's luck too.
You're not kidding.
Unless, like I said, don't forget though, the Beatles had a lot of stuff released on other labels.
Then again, we sure of that? Is it like introducing the Beatles, which we thought came out in July of '63?
No, Rob. But
January
Rob,
'64.
you have to understand all the failed Beatles singles on VJ and Swan. I mean, obviously, "She Loves You" was big after they appeared because it was a bomb when they first got it. Those were all prior to Sullivan as well.
Oh, sure.
So these people might have heard them and said,
but also too much.
Yeah.
Isn't it a way to also, and again, we're doing a lot of speculating, but isn't that also a way to get away with it? Because didn't you have a lot of publishing issues that quote locked in and distribution issues that locked in early '64 with Capitol? So that if you claimed that you'd released a record a little earlier, were you getting away under the window
maybe.
before?
Yeah, that might be the thing,
so
too.
you could turn around and say, "Oh no, we put that out in. You just didn't see it, but we put it out in before Capitol started suing everybody."
And Bob, you can do it. I mean, and let us know. But I'd have to read the line.
I think I have an answer for both of you a little bit. The album you're talking about, even the Schoolboys, the Liverpool kids or whatever, it does mention the Jack Parr show clip. The record label Palace is initially from Canada.
There you go.
Oh wow!
Thank you.
Canada
Rob.
by that point already had 2 albums out, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow,
and a couple of hits. Wow.
So there you go. That's your answer.
that could have been an import from Canada. You know, the way Roll Over Beethoven and All My Loving was capital of Canada, but it charted here also. You know,
Right.
That might have been Pickwick of Canada. No, I'm kidding.
But you might be right. But you know, that's very interesting. It came out of Canada.
That's cool as heck.
That's
cool. Now I want that one.
Well, Canada was very hip to the Beatles.
Before America.
When Dexter said this is crap and literally threw the singles in the garbage, Canada said we'll take it. And they didn't. They ended up doing very well with them. Obviously, when the Beatles hit, because all of them were re-released and did super. But they had a lot of weird All My Lovin', Roll Over Beethoven, ones that weren't here, but
singles,
on that fateful week of April '64 when they had the top 5, I believe one of them was the Canada, maybe Twist and Shout.
No, it wasn't Canada.
No, that was Tolly. I'm sorry.
Tolly.
But I think there was one.
There were 2 songs were on that list from Canada.
Right.
We're going off topic here, kids.
No, but it.
That's what we do.
Yes, but it directly ties to.
Oh yeah,
what we're talking about with the back of the album.
Certain things came out.
So you know what? Let's talk about, because you said the Manchesters, Bob, and they had 4 Beatle albums actually. They had the Beatle-Rama Volume 2, and A Hard Day's Night. Let's talk about those, because those are kind of interesting.
Well, those are the ones I think I mentioned. I actually like some of the songs on those. I think that a couple of the songs are pretty good. I mean, the first album is it says The New Sound from England.
Right.
And it has Beatle-Rama on the top. It's got the hair and pretty much like behind Mitch there.
Right.
But then on the bottom, it's with the Manchesters.
Right,
okay.
exactly.
And the Diplomat label.
But it says Beatle. It's weird because that one says Beatle and has the 4 mop tops. So you would really think, okay. But then let's skip Volume 2 for 1 second, because when we mentioned this earlier, A Hard Day's Night, which doesn't say the Beatle anywhere, it just says A Hard Day's Night, obviously to capitalize on the movie.
Right, that's all gone, yes.
Yeah, but they used the same exact cover as Beatle-Rama with the heads. So, but as we discussed, isn't that kind of shooting themselves in the foot? Because I know Hard Day's Night is the big sell, but if you went into the budget bin and had Beatle-Rama, or Grandma and Grandpa and Mom and Dad went and got Beatle-Rama, and then you went in 3 months later, and even though it said A Hard Day's Night, you're still looking at the same cover.
Well, hold it. Didn't Capitol do that on two singles?
Well, yeah, but it was the real
the same
Beatles,
picture.
Rob,
I know, but
wanna
it's the
hold your
same
hand.
picture.
Yeah, I want to hold your
but
hand.
then again,
and Can't Buy Me Love.
it
Right.
does have a Hard Day's Night in big print, and if Kimmy is dying for that song, it's still now, because of the United Artists cover. Even though this Diplomat album is in white, it still looks like the United Artists cover.
It does, and actually, it's just we talked about the soundtracks and how they sold, big time in the early '60s. This is a soundtrack, so parents might be interested in a soundtrack, because that's what parents bought.
Right,
Sound of Music, West Side
Still
Story.
had the same exact cover as Beatle-rama.
Oh yeah, well,
Bob, is there on any of those records, like particularly the one where there are 4 records by, quote, the same artists, when you drop the needle down, do you actually hear a similarity? Is it the same? Do you think it's the same players on those records, or is it just a name given to whoever happened to be in the studio that night because that was those were their Beatle guys?
Well, with this one, with the Manchesters, no, it does come off similar, and of course, whoever's actually playing is the same music being used on the Beetle Buddies, and it's also used on their Kitty record, which I guess we'll talk about later with the Grasshoppers.
Wow.
But Diplomat even put out another album talking about the idea of the Hard Day's Night cover and the Beetle wig. There's an album called From the Motion Picture A Hard Day's Night by Al Goodman and his orchestra. It's a red cover with a Beetle wig on it, and it says Ringo's theme, This Boy, and I Love Her.
But is that Canadian?
No, it's
Canadian
Diplomat.
one.
It's from New Jersey.
Oh,
But
wow.
my question is, though, when does it go from exploitative? And I guess it's when you're to just an album of covers, just an album of cover versions. I mean, it's, to me, like when you're really getting deceptive and you're not putting an artist name and you're not putting, and look, let's face it, if I was putting a record out, I would be using those head imageries too. That wasn't trademarked. It wasn't,
Right.
So when does it go from like just somebody who's saying, I put a band together and we're going to do an album of Beatles covers, the same way, you'd have lower level crooners doing songs that Sinatra did, or songs that the difference where the Beatle world comes in is that the Beatles were self-contained. So you're actually doing a cover version, but we end up kind of grouping all those records from '64 as being quote exploitation, when realistically speaking, if you had an album of tunes that were given to Dean Martin to do, he didn't write any of them. So if Jimmy Schnortzberg from Levittown did his own version of all those songs, no one's going to say, oh, this guy's exploiting Dean Martin, because he didn't write them. They're not. So the idea is, yeah, these people are kind of exploiting, but there's also that idea that, we're going to do an album of this group's covers and see how we do with it.
But if I did, let's say I recorded a CD of all of U2 songs, and I put their pictures on the cover, could I get away with it?
No.
But meanwhile, Santo and Johnny put out an album titled The Beatles' Greatest Hits, which it says like 14 times across their record cover. And on the back is actual photos of the Beatles.
Right.
So
But those had to be licensed though, Bob, because Santo and Johnny were actually a very successful act.
Right.
I mean, they that was not like fly under the radar.
Right.
This was Santo and Johnny. They had to have actually licensed the photos.
Yeah, but the thing about that is that the Santo and Johnny, if there was a picture of Santo and Johnny together with the Beatles, that's one thing. But I can see where here's some Beatle pictures. But then again, Santo and Johnny, one of them, I forgot which one it was, has mentioned that Santo and Johnny knocked the Beatles off the charts in Mexico or something. So that's one of their stories they tell. or the one the brother tells. So
what they mean was that a number of insects had landed on the Record World chart, and Santo and Johnny used their fingers and actually flicked the Beatles off of the chart.
Oh, okay.
So that's what happened. And they were in Mexico. So
another thing is talking about this genre is, like for example, the George Martin albums. Okay, in a similar vein, he used pictures of himself standing with the Beatles. Obviously, he should be allowed because he
of course
is the Beatle producer.
Of course.
But the Beatles had absolutely nothing to do with those records.
Right.
But the cover makes it look like they did, including on the back has actual, signatures and some little poem that they wrote about George Martin.
Right.
Well, for Help, the one that he did with Help doesn't even have him on the cover. Like, at least the Hard Day's Night, even the Hard Day's Night doesn't have him on the cover.
But the thing about
Beatle track does.
The thing about that, though, and Rob, you're familiar with the genre, but isn't something like that, the George Martin type records, aren't they really, they're not trying to attract the kids that think it's a Beatles record. The George Martin records, I think were going to a very specific demographic that were doing the easy listening thing. That was, the Jackie Gleason record buyers and my opinion.
I would say
likely,
that
yes.
The smaller the label, the more it might seem exploitation.
Bingo.
I don't know if you agree with me, Rob, but that's the way I would look at it. I mean, the Grasshoppers. Tell us about the Grasshoppers, because it's not the Beatles, but it is the Grasshoppers.
Right. Well, the Grasshoppers were the Kitty record Chipmunks ripoff for Diplomat Records. And on this cover, it does mention that they are the Grasshoppers. But again, I guess because they didn't want to put the name Beatles on the album cover, the cover says the Grasshoppers sing the Beetlewig hits.
Wow.
It shows the Beetlewig.
But it's got the same 3 songs as listed. The Manchesters, right? It's the same exact record as the Manchesters.
It's like the Manchesters. It's like the Beetle Buddies. It's just using the tracks over again.
And making them faster to make it sound like Chipmunks.
Sped up with the voice to make it sound like
So Diplomat was a key player in all this.
Definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, wow.
Definitely.
Yeah, and what people don't realize.
There's 5 albums from Diplomat of this stuff. That right there, like you said, Rob, that's a good point. Diplomat with 5 albums, that's exploiting the Beatles. And if you did one, yes, you're still exploiting, but they did 5.
Wow.
And that's a lot.
I think that the Grasshoppers were actually the Chipmunks moonlighting. I think that they got pissed at Seville. I think they just wanted their own deal, and I think that they just went in and did that record personally.
It's a cute cover, though. It's not that it's bad, and obviously you're not going to play it and think it's the Beatles, but
right.
But
or
again,
think it's the Chipmunks.
It's ripping off the idea of something else that was.
You know who missed the opportunity to exploit the Beatles? Abco Records.
Yeah.
He's probably saying, "How did I miss that? Oh, I'll get John and Yoko to like me in 1969."
Oh, jeez.
And record as the Chipmunks.
But the other thing with these, and even that label Winecoat, you don't see albums like this unless there are. Tell me, prove me wrong. You don't see albums like this of The Who. You don't see albums like this of the Rolling Stones.
Well, you did see, believe it or not, you did see Orchestral Tommies.
Yes, orchestral though.
Yeah, that's
Orchestral Tommies.
That's going to Jackie Gleason too.
But let's face it, though. Again, on the cover in big letters, it says Tommy. Formed by the the West Hudson Valley,
Cleveland Orchestra,
Community Orchestra. Yeah.
But what group had not 1 but 2 rip-off albums like this after the Beatles?
The Monkees.
That's it.
Oh yeah, right.
Both on Winecoat.
Were they really? That's funny. Wow.
Yeah, you're right.
That they took even a step further, where they took titles of the songs and just made them into something else instead of Your Auntie Griselda, the song was Your Uncle Grizzly.
Well, Rob, how many of these labels are still around? Diplomat is not around. Why not? Is right? Around?
Well, Diplomat is. I said it before. It was Peter Pan.
Okay, so
right.
Okay, but most of the labels are out of business, or
right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And again, that's just it, to find the information on these things. A couple of years ago, I did get in touch with somebody at Synthetic Plastics, but they kept saying, well, we'll get you to one of our researchers for the label from years ago, and I just had a total runaround, so I never really
did any of them say
got to anybody.
We'll get you to our label director, Neil Adspindall. Hold on, we'll get him.
That would be good. Yeah.
He's always available too, I hear.
Yeah.
Brian Epstein instead of Brian Epstein.
Yeah, Brian Epstein. EEN.
EEN. Right.
Anyway,
Under the New Jersey wall.
Yeah. So
well,
right.
I think we talked about everything. We
talked about a lot. I mean, we could still talk. Obviously, we can still put up some more, in a slideshow or something.
Right. I mean, there were a couple that you're just like, the record had absolutely nothing to do with the Beatles. So then why did you make a cover that looked like it?
That's funny.
It's called The Cash Cow.
Yeah, there was a children's album with like Humpty Dumpty.
The Beetle Beat.
Yeah. And, the characters, the different nursery rhyme stuff, Mother Goose, they all have beetle wigs on the cover. But the record,
I actually have that.
The record, you do. The record was recorded way before. It has nothing to do with that genre whatsoever.
You know why? Because I only have it, Bob, because as Rob alluded, I collect 45s. So I saw it one day in a bin, and it almost looks like a golden record, the little kids records.
Yeah,
the Golden Books
that's
records.
what it is. Yeah,
yeah, and it's a yellow vinyl. I mean, and it's them reciting the nursery rhymes in a Beetle beat.
Wow.
Oh yeah, so you get like Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. It's really.
But isn't that also that song, that big hit by the Hollies? Ain't that just like me? Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. I mean, wasn't that like actually what that was? Anyway. I mean, ain't that just like me?
But that one actually had that. It's funny because that had a picture cover, the 45, and the record is so small that when you put it in the picture sleeve, it bounces around because it's not even the size of the actual record. Yeah. So, but that was cool because again, it had a picture sleeve and it was a 45. So I sought out the album because I actually played the two songs, and it was kind of interesting. I mean, to me, that was a novel idea, putting nursery rhymes to a quote Beetle beat. So that's the only reason I have that one. But that's kind of interesting.
That too. There's another one called the Beetle Beat. It says it's a dance discotheque LP featuring the Blue Beats. But what they did was a group of teens dancing, and they superimposed a beetle wig over the top of them, so you just see their legs.
Oh, God.
And the back cover is a whole thing of how to do the twist. So it's like, what? It has nothing to do with
the Beatles.
Anything Beatles. But
the Blue Beats, once they discovered that they did not get the girls because of their album, became the Blue Bulls.
Oh, boo! Boo!
How about this one comedy record, which actually came out on Swan, called "It's a Beetle World" or "It's a Cuckoo Beetle World" by Al Fisher and Lou Marks. It's up on YouTube. Listen to it; it's horrible.
Wow,
a lot of them were really bad. I mean, look, like you said, all these albums had maybe some merit to them at some point to someone. Someone must have liked some of the stuff on here because, we're still talking about them, and we're only talking about them now because obviously the Beatle connection. But, I mean, some of them must have sold, and some of them, like Tony said, must have just crapped out. But, Tony, on some of the bigger labels that they were on, and I'm not saying big labels, but like Diplomat was obviously owned by others, they may not have cared. They put out 5 because even though the first four may not have sold, again, maybe lost leaders, or they just didn't care because it didn't cost them much, or that was just expense.
Or they wrote off things on it, like the way record companies do. They put the losses on the record that doesn't sell, then they don't have to pay the people who actually sell.
Right.
So.
Right.
But yeah, and as we alluded to, the bands never got any royalties.
Sure,
they were happy to be on a record.
Yeah. No, they pulled them out of a club in Jersey or something.
Correct.
We're going to record today, learn the Beatles stuff.
Yeah, and the Grasshoppers were happy that they were getting noticed because the Chipmunks just kicked their butt.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Another quirky.
East Coast, West Coast there.
Yeah. That was good. Were you gonna say
one other quirky one, thinking of Tony, is I know Tony's a big Guess Who fan.
He is? I didn't know that.
So wasn't there something about the name Guess Who too? But then there also was a band that put out a full record. They're wearing masks, and they're called the You Know Who group.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It says the boys with that great new British sound. I don't think they were British at all.
Yeah, but that's again exploiting not only the Beatles, but obviously the whole invasion.
Right, yeah.
Because you're right, though. Once again, I have to go back to what I said earlier. In all seriousness, the power of the Beatles and the almighty dollar. Because everybody, it's like the old Bugs Bunny cartoon, One Froggy Evening, where the guy gets the talking frog, and right away he sees all the money coming. Oh my God, I got a talking frog, and then he obviously doesn't sing for everybody. But it's the same thing. You hear the Beatles, and you may have a connection in the record industry, and you see the dollar signs just pouring out, and you go, I think I can do it. And hopefully these people didn't lose, houses and stuff. But, hey, look, even, what's his name? Bob Eubanks, when he wanted the Beatles in Hollywood Bowl, mortgaged his house. Yeah. In order to get, and then he said,
I'm going to tell you, Mitch, that nobody mortgaged their house to record any of these records. Nobody. People didn't even mortgage their slippers to do these records.
What, Gilbert Gottfried all of a sudden coming back?
Anyway.
No, but honestly, he said after they played Hollywood Bowl, he then got his house back and bought three more.
Right, bought more.
And then he got on TV.
Right. Hopefully.
Before we go, do you want to add anything before we go? If we missed anything, or if you want to bring up a certain record or topic or whatever?
I just think it's it's a little known genre of records it can be fun. It's like
Absolutely.
Let's say in baseball card type of things, you collect wacky packs. I mean, they're goofy little things. You get a kick out of them, but it's part of the popular culture, and it just displays even more so of the mania that happened back then. I mean, like you said about that album where the girl posted pictures of the Beatles on the cover, you feel bad that somebody got really taken like that. Right. But at the same time, maybe they cherished it and thought it was one of their records. I think one person had told me in discussion of these records that they kept it in with their regular Beatle albums. They just assumed it was real, and then one day looked at it and said, "Wait a minute."
Oops.
Well, the funny thing is, again, I was looking up a couple of things, and there were a few of these. I'm going to get it because I want to see it. There were a few of these where I looked it up on some rate your record site, and like Beatlemania in the USA, the one by the Liverpools.
Right.
There's a quote from a guy from 2012, and he says, "When I was a little kid back in '64, my father came home with this album thinking it was the Beatles. I remember him saying that their name was the Liverpools before becoming the Beatles." Talk about history. He said, let's just say the Beatle covers aren't bad. The originals aren't bad either. I still remember some of them after all these years. So obviously they had significant impact on a lot of people, whether in a good way or bad way.
Right. And it's a good story. It's a good story. My parents, they bought the wrong record for me. You're a Beatle fan.
Right.
I got the Bugs. Oh, look at this. My parents know nothing about music. And then they say they know something about music, and then their kids ask them to buy rap records or something. So
that's the other thing though. some of them have to be rare, right, Bob? Some of them have to be.
Right.
So
Like we didn't even go into what's the one? The biggest honorable mention would be, or unhonorable mention would
dishonorable
be
mention.
the Beagle and the 4 Liverpool wigs.
Right. So, but if you got that when you were a kid in '64 and you kept it, now today, it's not like a dollar thing anymore. So you can actually, your parents might have done you good. You can make some money, nowadays, because they gave you something now which became rare because it was so crappy, so to speak.
Yep.
Right.
No, good point. One thing I want to add, because we're going to close up shop.
Yeah.
This one thing
Close
that
up
Mitch
shop?
said. What? Shop, yeah, whatever.
Stop. We're just stopping the show.
Just one more thing, as Mitch likes to say, I say.
You do.
Mitch, you were talking about cover bands today. And, you got like 1964, the Fab Four, the Fab Four, whatever.
There's a whole bunch, yeah.
A few years ago, 1964 was playing the Westbury Music Fair, and their tickets were more expensive than Ringo Starr playing the Westbury Music Fair. An actual Beatle was like $90 tickets. 1964 was like $130 tickets.
Well, remember they tried to auction Ringo off on Saturday Night Live, and they got more for Paul's toothbrush.
Well, let me tell you something funny, because as of this taping, my wife and I had just seen the Fab Four at Westbury the other night.
That's why I brought it up.
Right, and we posted it on Facebook, and one of my wife's friends unbelievably said, who was standing in for John and George? Was it Danny and Sean or Julian? And my wife looked at me and she said, is she nuts? I mean, wow. I said, are you kidding? Does she really think it was the Beatles?
Yeah, well.
So anyway.
My goodness.
All right.
Well, okay. Well,
sorry, guys. I'm actually sitting here chasing a mosquito that just actually attacked me while I'm doing the show.
Okay.
In case anyone thinks I'm turning into like a, wow.
Well, I want to thank our guest today. His article is in the magazine Retro Fan, the September-October 2023 edition of Beatles Exploitation records. And we talked about that. Rob talks about a whole other thing too, which we did not talk about because we want you to buy the article in the magazine and support this magazine and support Bob, because it was a really good article and there's a lot of angles we covered here, but we left a couple. So you might say, well, I heard them on the Fab Four Free-for-All, and then you don't buy the record or buy the magazine. So please go out, buy Rob's article or the whole thing for Retro Fan Magazine, September, October 2023. And by the way, one more thing, we keep seeing on the video, Mitch has the 4 mop top things. That's our logo right there for the Fab Four Free-for-All.
No, it's not actually.
we have the we just have the haircut.
I stole it somewhere else.
I know. But so we want to thank Rob Koenig for joining us. Rob, great article. Thanks for coming on. You did a great job with us. It was a ton of fun. And
absolutely.
And I want to thank my co-host, Mitch Axelrod.
Take care, folks.
Tony Triguardo.
Bye, folks. I got the mosquito, by the way.
All right. And today I've been your moderator. My name is Rob Leonard. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
You didn't get Bob to say bye.
Oh, that's right. But, he went like this. He gave me
okay, there we go. All right, we'll take a namaste.
No, say bye.
Bob, verbally say goodbye. Say goodbye.
Goodbye.
All right. Yeah. Okay. If you saw the visual, he did the thing. Whatever the hell.
But our audio listeners just went, "Wow, Rob popped something on us."
They like that. Hey.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Fab Four Free for All was edited and produced by Tony Triguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York.
The opening and closing theme is My Dolly by the band The Badge, featuring longtime listener Jeff Slate, available on its debut album Digital Retro and recent Best Of compilation, as well as from the Fab Four Free for All website.
Thanks for listening to Fab Four Free for All.